Palace certainly shows a degree of anxiety about the Queen's condition. She has been in very good health, remarkably good health, for all of her 96 years. There are many conditions affecting frail older people, affecting mobility. She did have back and knee problems going back a decade or so ago and needed treatment for that, but she has been in remarkably good health. But there is this concern right now amongst her doctors with her at Balmoral.
Hugh, many thanks for the moment. Hugh Pym, our medical editor there, health editor. We have a statement from the former Prime Minister, Sir Tony Blair, who has again been saying a few things about the developments today. This is social media from Sir Tony Blair. It is deeply concerning, he said, to hear today's news from Buckingham Palace. My thoughts and prayers are with Her Majesty the Queen and her family at this worrying time. So Tony Blair adding his voice to the other voices heard today, including Cardinal Nichols and the Chief Rabbi, and of course the Prime Minister Liz Truss, the Labour leader Keir Starmer, Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish National Party, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. They've all been expressing their concerns and saying that their prayers are with the family at this time. And still with me is our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell. Nick, again, for those people who are now tuning in and watching what's going on, I've conveyed some of the concerns that some of the political and religious leaders have been expressing. What are you picking up now?
I think at the moment, Hugh, we just have to wait. There is no further news. The mood is undoubtedly sombre. There is serious concern that is reflected in the statements of Prime Ministers past and present, and First Ministers and religious leaders. I think everybody is reacting to the same set of facts, and I think those facts really speak for themselves. The fact, most pointedly, I think, and most expressively, is the fact that the family are gathering. The family are, in some cases, making the long journey up to Balmoral to be at the Queen's bedside at this moment. She has been advised by her doctors to rest, to continue resting. Her doctors have said that there is now concern for her health, and that is the first time that they have said as much publicly. That, I think, speaks for itself also. The doctors, under the head of the medical household, Professor Sir Hugh Thomas, they clearly have been in close attendance throughout the summer, throughout her time at Balmoral, and I'm quite sure that they will have made all the contingency arrangements so that she can receive whatever treatment she needs within Balmoral, without having to take her to Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. And I'm sure that all those facilities are there within Balmoral Castle, and there will be doctors and nurses in attendance on a permanent basis. It brings us back to this question of what is the cause of the health concern? Is it merely the mobility issue? Now, let's be candid, mobility issues don't generally end a life. So I think the suspicion, but it is only a suspicion, must be, as it has been for a number of months, that there is some underlying condition. We saw the significant weight loss that was evident in the Christmas broadcast that had taken place really over last autumn after this sharp change in circumstances, October the 20th. Cancellation of that visit to Belfast, and everything really has unfolded since that date. The light duties, the less visible monarch, the forced cancellation of some of the fixed points in the constitutional year, the state opening of Parliament, the Remembrance Service, and so on. So I think that inevitably it is legitimate to wonder whether the mobility issue has been used as a little bit of a smokescreen by Buckingham Palace. Episodic mobility issues, well, perhaps that is gout, which, as we were saying, is very painful, very debilitating, and could be a reason for the inability to go out in public as much, quite apart from just the fact that she is 96, a vehicle there coming out of Balmoral. But I think that what one must wonder is whether there has been something else
Yes.
happening health-wise that is the cause of them saying today that they are concerned for her health. Though, of course, they do say that she is comfortable at Balmoral, and we must hope that she is able to rally and recover from whatever episode it is that caused the cancellation last night of the virtual Privy Council meeting. Was it simply that she was having to rest after a full day, 2 audiences with the outgoing and incoming Prime Ministers? Or is there just, has the gradual deterioration in health now reached a significant moment? Has the frailty really increased to the point where she is perhaps now bedridden, where her family are gathering at that bedside around her?
More expressions of concern coming in, Nick, and this is from the Muslim Council of Britain. The Muslim Council of Britain saying our thoughts and prayers are with Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family at this time. We wish Her Majesty a swift and lasting recovery. Well, there'll be lots of people uniting with that wish. That is the Muslim Council of Britain. Let's join the former royal correspondent, currently the associate editor of the Daily Telegraph, that is Camilla Tominey. And Camilla, it's good to have you with us, albeit in rather worrying circumstances. What are you hearing? Can you share with us anything that you've been hearing today?
I think really it's in line with what Nick Witchell has just spoken to you about, Hugh, really. On one hand, obviously, journalistically, there's a desire to try and find out what exactly has gone on, while balancing that with the privacy of a woman who is undoubtedly known to everybody in this country as our greatest public servant. And therefore, she is entitled to privacy concerning health matters. And it is probably right that we don't know some of the details at this stage of what exactly she is suffering from. But I think the signs are looking ominous, to have family rushing to Balmoral, some travelling quite great distances in short time, to have the unprecedented nature of the statement from Buckingham Palace talking about the concern of doctors for Her Majesty's health, and indeed to have the scenes that played out in the House of Commons earlier, where clearly Nadine Zahawi, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, was instructed to interrupt that statement somewhat to inform Prime Minister Liz Truss and others of the state of play. I don't think the Palace would have taken that kind of measure if they didn't think that it was something that needed to be urgently flagged. And so, like your viewers now, you know, I'm reflecting with a degree of worry and sadness that the royal family have had to gather at the Queen's bedside like this.
We were talking as well about the cancellation of the virtual meeting with the Privy Council yesterday. That followed, of course, the audience with Liz Truss and with Boris Johnson on Tuesday. Again, just in terms of what that might have signalled, we were discussing with Nick just now, Camilla, that could have been, of course, just a need to rest after a rather busy day for a woman of 96. But yeah, the inevitable thought today, of course, is that the last 24 hours may have brought something of a sharp deterioration. Possibly, although knowing the Queen as we all do, she is somebody who likes to keep busy, and it's remarkable what she has still been doing in recent weeks and months at the age of 96. Just to see her photographed at Balmoral in front of that roaring fire as she prepared to greet the new Prime Minister, and to still be working day to day with her red boxes and making public appearances, frankly, defies belief. Somebody who's 4 years off her centenary. I don't think she'd want it any other way. I think that she's always wanted to keep busy. Equally, I think to be in Balmoral at the moment, to make the decisions that were made, again, unprecedented, to have Liz Truss travel to her rather than vice versa, is completely fitting of what we are in, which is uncharted territory with a monarch of this age. Well, Camilla, thank you so much for joining us. Camilla Tominey there, former royal correspondent, now associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. And we can have a word too with Jonathan Spangler, historian from Manchester Metropolitan University, who specialises in history and affairs of the monarchy. Jonathan, thanks again for joining us. And I'm just wondering, could you help us in terms of what this scene today represents, the fact that there is now this official concern for the health of the longest reigning monarch in British history?
Well, I think that very last sentence that you said really puts a fine point on it, that this is one of the longest reigns we've ever seen. So I believe that people aren't really entirely sure what is going to happen, although, of course, as we know, there are very, very set protocols that have been in place for many years, and many things will be set into motion as they need to be. But I think as a historian, it's something that I find quite interesting, that transitions from one monarch to another are always set with difficulties and anxieties and worries, as they are really transitional points in our history, and similarly with histories all around the world. And I think because the monarchy of Great Britain is still such a significant institution, it really will be quite interesting to see what plays out over the next few days.
We are talking, of course, about a family that is concerned for the health of a mother and a grandmother and a close relative, but having to do that really in the full glare of the public publicity that comes with that. So the stresses are clear. It's not that they are unused to the glare of public publicity, but at this time, of course, it's very much a family that is concerned for the well-being of a loved one, and somebody who's loved not just by the family, but by millions, billions indeed, of people around the world. That's the perspective, isn't it, that changes all of our calculations about what's going on and the implications of what's going on. And again, you can help us in terms of past precedent. When we think about similar circumstances in the past, they're a very long time ago, transitions can be very problematic things.
Yes, that's right. The history of any monarchy, whether it's Britain or other European or even non-European countries, these have often been very challenging times. And every monarch, for the history of any monarchy, has had to balance the needs of being a public figure with being a private figure. And so the fact that they have both the family has to react as a dynasty and do a public role, and private, as you mentioned, this is the grandmother, this is the mother, is often a very difficult balance. And in the past, before media really kind of came along and public opinion in the 17th and 18th century, this was maybe a simpler affair because deaths could happen outside of the spotlight. But since the 18th and 19th century, certainly, there's been quite a lot of press coverage of these things. And then certainly within our own more recent history, since the 1960s, the British monarchy in particular has really opened up more of its activities, its life, its day-to-day life to the media and to public opinion. So I think that this is all unprecedented. But I also think that we live happily in terms of monarchical history, we live in more, I guess I could say, civilized times. So there isn't really, there's no threat of some rogue royal racing in to grab the throne. Those days are past. So I think we can look to a bit more civilized transitional phase.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Jonathan Spangler there from Manchester. And for another perspective, we're joined by the royal expert and author of a new book called Defenders of the Faith, the British Monarchy, Religion and the Next Coronation, whenever that happens. Hopefully it's a while away. Let's talk to Catherine Pepinster. Catherine, good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Again, what are your reflections on the fact that we are simply now looking at Balmoral? We're looking at the Queen's great estate there in Aberdeenshire in the full knowledge that her own medical team have deep concerns about her welfare. Now, as someone who studied the monarchy in different forms, what are your reflections today?
I think that it's fair to say that we all have a sense that, to use a phrase used of politics some while ago, the tectonic plates are shifting. There is a sense that perhaps we're on the cusp of a new era, and I think many of us will find that really quite a disturbing moment. We have relied on the Queen for 70 years to bring stability and continuity to this country. We saw that only yesterday with the transition between two prime ministers, that she was what we call the dignified part of the Constitution, but she was there, she was something that said stability to us all as the country underwent great change. And I think if we are seeing the end of her reign, that will be quite a traumatic moment for us all. You must be heading towards 80 yourself to be able to remember any other monarch, and we've relied on her to be there. Perhaps some of us have even taken her for granted, and I think this is really momentous for the nation if we are seeing the era coming to an end.
When you look at parallels, when you look at transitions, when you look at the whole question of the relationship between the royal family, for example, and the Church of England as the established church, again, when we talk about transition, what are the questions that bring themselves to the fore for you?
Well, I think one of the things that's very different now is that it would have been taken for granted when the Queen came to the throne herself 70 years ago that everybody was at least nominally Anglican, that the Church of England was the religion of the country, and that is not quite as it was then. And so we might wonder, should that have an impact on the coronation we have? We are a much more diverse nation now in terms of both Christian denominations and other religions, and I think that's something that the Queen herself has recognised. Perhaps she was onto that earlier than the rest of us. I'm reminded of her 1952 Christmas message, the first of her reign before her coronation in 53, when she asked for people of all faiths to pray for her. I think that's a remarkable thing to have asked in 1952. And I think that at this moment, when it seems that perhaps we are now in the period of transition, that request that people of all faiths pray for her is one perhaps that we should all remember now, that this is a moment for people of all faiths to pray for her again. But I think we have such a different nation to the one we had in 52, that how Britain responds if we are at that moment of change will be a great challenge.
Catherine, just a final point, if I may. We're just looking at images of the entrance to Balmoral Estate here, and some comings and goings. They've brought out some of the barriers. For someone like you who really does try to consider monarchy across a great arc of history, beyond even the longest reign in British history, it's one of those days where I suppose you begin to look at how the monarchy is this great constant, and that people really are very, very dependent on it in many ways.
Yes, I think you're right. And it's interesting to look back at what happened when Queen Victoria died. And the great novelist Henry James wrote about this in his diaries, which I read. And he talked about how discombobulated people were and wondered how Britain was going to cope. But actually, it did cope, because along came another monarch, Edward VII, who turned out to be a very popular king. So we do have a way of having a transition, having a change, yet having constancy. But I think after such a long reign, the nation will find this a difficult moment indeed. Particularly as we are in such a period of transition anyway, because we have a new Prime Minister, things seem very fluid, and perhaps we've relied on the Queen to offer us this stability at such a difficult and fluid time.
Catherine, very good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Catherine Pepinster there, the royal author. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, with me. And Catherine, of course, making the salient point there, Nick, which is that we're talking about a monarch who has, for millions of people, represented a big reliable, solid, constant for decades.
Constant in an ever-shifting, ever-changing world. She has been a source of stability and, for many people, of great reassurance. We're reminded of that in the last few days, the appointment of her 15th Prime Minister. It reminds us of the span of years that she has been there and the changes that have taken place in the United Kingdom throughout those 70 years in every aspect of our lives. Cultural, industrial, political, economic. We've come from empire into Europe and then out of Europe. The Commonwealth has taken shape during her reign, something of immense importance to her. She's visited 150 countries, I think, during her reign, and of course many of those visits were to the countries of the Commonwealth. And she said very early on in her reign that she would support and do everything that she could for the Commonwealth every day of her life, she said, I think, in the Christmas broadcast in 1953. And that has been absolutely key to her. And without her, I don't think the Commonwealth would be the organisation that it is today. But it underlines how constant and dependable she has been, and we must hope will continue to be throughout these 70 years of her reign. But I think that it is absolutely true that she has been this anchoring point. And whilst everything, the still, calm centre, whilst so much around her has changed, a focus for national identity and continuity, and she has represented those best of qualities, hasn't she? She has represented just duty and decency and dignity, and those really have been many of the hallmarks of this remarkable reign, a remarkable reign which continues. There is nothing further from Buckingham Palace, and we have no reason to expect that there will be. We must just wait and see whether further news does emerge once the immediate family members have arrived at Balmoral. There seem to be a lot of vehicles coming out of Balmoral estate, but I haven't noticed very many going in.
No.
But we will continue, obviously, to watch events there.
Just to draw on that point about continuity, Nick, it's been interesting talking to younger people in recent weeks who've been focusing a little more on this remarkable figure of the Queen, far more than they have done maybe in the past, and realising with some great surprise that the Queen really, has been around since just after the Second World War. And for lots of young people, this is ancient history. So it just underlines the fact that what she represents is something remarkable, not just to people who are in some age today, but also to people whose notion of what is old and old-fashioned is different.
She is the embodiment of so much of our history, isn't she, really? She represents the nation's history to itself, and she represents the nation to the wider world. And the fact that she has that link with that greatest generation, if you like, of the Second World War. She was part of the armed forces as a member of the Auxiliary Territorial Service. She never saw action, obviously, but she did join up. She wanted to do her duty, and at the age of 18, she did. And she recognises and identifies very closely with the armed forces, and particularly with that wartime generation, with the D-Day veterans, with the others who served during the Second World War, because she went through it. And of course she witnessed her father, George VI, the wartime king, and the impact that it has on him. And of course she knew Winston Churchill. She was witness to that, and he was, as we know, her first Prime Minister, the first of the 15. But now, talking of continuity, reminds us, of course, that Prince Charles is at Balmoral. He will be at his mother's side. He is already the oldest, longest-serving heir apparent in British history. Yeah. So he is there, whatever is the outcome of the present concerns about the Queen's health. Charles is there. We've seen him standing in so much more, deputising for her in recent months. And when ultimately he does take to the throne, it's an extraordinary fact that he will be the oldest person to become king in British history. But that is the situation at the moment. We await any further news, but at the moment there is nothing further of any certainty that we can say.
Earlier, Nick, we were talking about the Queen's great adherence to the Christian faith.